Good morning, everyone. I'm Frank Kaufman, the director of the Professor's World Peace Academy, PWPA, and welcome to the PWPA Scholars Interview series. This morning, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Gordon Anderson, and we'll be covering a number of topics. Just very quickly before we invite him here onto the show, let me give you a word of Professor Gordon Anderson's life. Dr. Gordon Anderson earned his PhD in philosophy of religion at Claremont Graduate University. His minor studies there were international relations and peace studies. As director and secretary general of the Professor's World Peace Academy, in 1985, he organized with Professors Alexander Stromas, Morton Kaplan, and 90 Sovietologists in Geneva, Switzerland, a conference entitled The Fall of the Soviet Empire, Prospects for Transition to a Post-Soviet World. This was a controversial topic at the time because it was created during the peak of Soviet influence and dominance in world affairs. Very prophetic meeting. In 1989 in London, England, with the guidance of Professor Edward Shills of Cambridge University, Dr. Anderson organized a conference of 90 experts on democratic government titled Liberal Democracies, Societies, Liberal Democratic Societies, the Present State and Future Prospects. Dr. Anderson has also served as president of the Minnesota Legislative Evaluation Assembly, of which he has been a member evaluating the Minnesota legislature since 1999. He is president of Paragon House Publishers, a book publishing company, since 1994, and he was editor-in-chief of the International Journal on World Peace, IJWP, from 1993 until just a few short weeks ago. Please join me to welcome to our program, Dr. Gordon Anderson. Hi, Dr. Anderson, welcome to our PWPA podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. I always feel a little funny and a little awkward that I would ever be welcoming you to anything related to PWPA. I should always kind of be at the foot of your throne because the organization had all of its greatest moments during the time of your tenure as its leader and all that you did for it over the years.
Yeah, PWPA did a lot of activities, and all the founding members have now passed away, so it's not the same.
Yeah. Hopefully the work that's happened over the course of the years has made enduring changes and continues to impact the world. I have a few things in mind for us as we proceed. I'm going to see if I can access them on my screen because that's where my notes lie. If not, we may have to change a bit. Okay, that's good. I am able to see it. And so I'll proceed from those. The last time we were together, right at the beginning of this podcast series for PWPA, you and I had an interview, and it was a little bit some of the stuff we're going to get into. Again, you were talking about the social and political systems related to health. It was right at the beginning of the COVID, not at the beginning, but as the COVID pandemic started to show some of its politicization in the health industry and in public communications, I had you on and we did a very important interview, in my estimation, on human health and your unique insights into, you were comparing the health universe or the health industry similar to an individual as an organized system Do you remember that conversation?
Well, an individual is a biological system, and a social institution is a human system, and its cells are made up of the people that make it up. And we understand human beings pretty well. Throughout history, we've got the Ten Commandments, we've got other the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and others coming down through history where we understand human nature and human biology pretty well, but we don't understand social institutions that well. They're just sort of haphazardly organized, and in order to work, they have to be held together in a way that you could say is analogous to the human body, which is another system.
Yes.
And so that's what I think I might have been talking about, the healthcare system, whether it's run by a government or whether it's run by a corporation or whether it's run by any institution other than individual doctors. You have to bring the understanding of how social institutions work into the discussion.
Right. I'm going to link to that interview now that I'm being reminded of it in this conversation, because I think that you had a comparison. It was a very interesting parallel between viruses that can invade institutions, similar to the way viruses can invade human beings. And that's a little bit where we were going, and you were discussing the health industry along those lines with the metaphor of virus, or perhaps even the reality of virus.
Yeah, I think that the reality of virus, but based on the system that's got the virus. So a biological virus, of course, attacks the human body or other animals, whereas a computer virus attacks the operating system or some other part of computer software and redirects it for another purpose that is not what it's intended. And of course, that can drag down computers. So when I wrote my book, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness 4.0, I began with an introduction of how the government as a social institution also has been plagued by viruses. The US founders set up an operating system based on the Constitution, which had a values system based on the Declaration of Independence. So that Constitution and the laws they created were to enable a governing institution to achieve the values of the Declaration of Independence. And that has been hijacked and circumvented and sidestepped for 200 years. Ever since the founders created that, people have been trying to get around it and use the government for their own purposes, use the treasury for their own purposes.
Yes, and so when a serious epidemic or a serious threat to the stability of society like the recent pandemic happens, then all the corruption and corrosion and infiltration that you described happening over the centuries becomes strained. We realize that we haven't maintained the strength and stability needed to respond to a major crisis like we're in the middle of now.
That's exactly correct. I think people, as long as things were going well, they don't worry about government. They go and cast their vote once every 4 years, but they don't think about it. The election of Donald Trump, and then the pandemic, these threw monkey wrenches at people that help them understand how the system has been failing. Initial reactions were very superficial by most people, but as we go along, people are more studying and realizing that there are systemic problems, that there are problems with political parties and many other, the way we vote and many other things that have been hijacked. The government's been hijacked over the years, and we see the effects of that in the politics today.
Yes, yes. Well, you've dedicated a lot of your life very seriously to the careful study of political and social reality, and have produced a lot of good writing and insightful writing on these. If we have time, we may get on the second half of our interview here, we may get to some of that, because it seems like what I've been reading about systems analysis of institutions bears heavily on similar types of issues as you've just mentioned.
Yes, yes.
Good. Well, let's see if we get to that. I'm sure we will. But what I wanted to do with the first part of our interview is kind of speak to you. You seem to be managing it well, like not mourning or grieving, but for many of us, it feels like a sad moment. It probably has to be acknowledged at least a little bit as a sad moment, because the International Journal of World Peace just published its final issue. And it was what was it, the winter of 21? What is the name of that issue? Fall 21 or?
December 2021. Yes, that's the last issue after 38 years of publication.
That's an amazing commitment, amazing period of time, an amazing longevity. I'm sure there must be great journals. There must be great journals in the academy that have a long history, but it's hard to get a longer one than that. That's 38 years of publication. And so December of 2021 was the final issue.
Yes. Yeah, it was a sad moment, but it's something I've come to terms with. One of our founders, Dr. Richard Rubenstein, once told me that you have to know the things you can control, and what you can't control. And one thing I can't control is my aging, and I've got problems with my eyes that make it more difficult to continue to publish the journal, as well as the lack of funding from traditional sources. In fact, all the people that had funded the journal have passed away.
Amazing, amazing. Life goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that a thought. Oh, Dr. Rubenstein was a great mentor to many of us. The few words that would come now and then, and they endure and they guide us. One of the things I was thinking about, a sad moment, is it would be counted a sad moment when the last of your children move out of the house, in a way, right? But these are things that things mature and they have their next phases and next steps.
Yes, he was one of the last of our founding board members to sort of move out of the house. But I have known him for many, many years, and he's certainly been a mentor, as many of the others who have been advisors to the journal for many years.
I will bring them up. I want to ask about just any anecdotes and anything we can learn from the very, very elegant relationship you maintained that was professional and also like a family with many of those gentlemen and ladies like Dr. and Mrs. Rubenstein. When you talked about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, indeed, it's like family. I have stayed at the homes of almost all the people I mentioned in the farewell to the journal in the last issue. And last time I saw Morton Kaplan at his house, he gave me a big hug and an autographed copy of his most recent book. Panis Bardis had me the original, editor of the journal, had me to his home with our whole family and his family together.
Amazing.
Dinner. Alex Stromas, our family stayed at his house. And Dr. Rubenstein, just a couple of years before he passed away, invited me for the Friday night meal that's so important to
Yeah.
and then I put on the little
It's a beautiful tradition.
yeah.
There's nothing like it on earth, to be in the home of a observant Jewish family and to participate in the Seder. It's wonderful. Yeah, being in one another's homes there's a certain intimacy and vulnerability. It's really opening your doors, and it's a step beyond every other type of collaboration. This is who we are, and we show ourselves to you. It's in a way your family, in a way, this kind of
Yes.
experience.
I was surprised before Professor Stromas passed away. He was dying from he knew he was terminally ill, and a package came in the mail with a bunch of photographs, and it said, "Friends should have such things."
Isn't that great? Where did he live, Dr. Stromas?
He was
area?
at that time he was teaching at Hillsdale College and living
Oh.
in Hillsdale, Michigan.
Oh, I see. Wonderful, wonderful. I didn't know he taught at Hillsdale.
Oh yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that was the last of his professional, where he concluded his public, professional, and academic life there at Hillsdale.
Yes, he started in Russia, had some of the best training in the law school at the University of Moscow, and spoke several languages, but didn't get along with the people in power in the 70s and emigrated to England. And he joined PWPA there and became, in not too long, the chairman of PWPA in England. And then he moved to the United States. He had a 2-year, I think, 1 or 2 year stint at the Hoover Institution.
Oh, yeah.
At Stanford University.
And his role with the journal?
His role with the journal was as an advisor on the advisory board, but he contributed several articles as well as recommended and reviewed other articles.
Yeah, yeah,
as advisors do.
It was really a great team. We could count on each other, or you could count on your colleagues. It was a joint effort, even though it had the classical titles and positions. In your farewell letter, or kind of I believe, was it called? Letter from the editor, or no?
Farewell to the International Journal on World Peace. It was a subtitle in my
in the journal itself.
Comments.
Yes. Yeah. The list that I saw was Panos Bardos, Morten Kaplan, and Nicholas Kittrey, in that order. Is that how the team was led over time, passing one to the other? Or? Well,
Panos Bardos was the first editor, and he had been editor of the International Social Science Review. So when PWPA decided it was going to publish a journal at a meeting in the Early House in 1983, Panos, who edited the International Social Science Review, volunteered and was chosen by the others there to head this project up, because he was already a known editor in the social sciences, and he taught sociology at the University of Toledo in Ohio.
I see. Now, did that overlap? Did he maintain both journals for a period of time?
He did maintain both journals. I think that he quit the International Social Science Review a little sooner when he became ill, because he didn't have someone like me helping him with that one.
Okay.
And then and by 1993, he had to retire from our journal, and then I took over.
Okay, so he was the founding editor-in-chief or editor,
Right.
and you were his partner, right at his right-hand shoulder, helping it.
Right,
see
you
the
said I
light
was
of-
managing editor. I made sure everything got published. He sent the articles into me, and I made sure they got typeset and
a lot of the
managed
work.
subscriptions and things like that.
Yes, and then because he had a person like you, although he had to retire from the prior journal that he ran, the what was it again? The Social Science.
International Social Science Review.
Yes,
I probably stopped that 2 or 3 years sooner.
sooner could keep at the work with a steady hand at his side like you, and then when he retired from that, then you inherited the position as editor at that point.
I did, and I had a PhD with a minor in international relations and peace studies. So I had kind of educationally groomed myself for that position.
Mhm. And actually, you maintained a lot of publishing responsibilities, not only the journal, but also you produced a lot of books, or
Yes,
just
as Secretary General of the Professors World Peace Academy, we were involved in sponsoring a lot of academic conferences that led to conference proceedings and other books by members of the Academy that attended those meetings or sent in articles that we published. And we had a line of Professors World Peace Academy books and International Conference on the Unity of the Sciences books that I was involved in editing and publishing with Paragon House. And then later ended up with Paragon House Publishing as well.
right. So after time passed, over the course of time, you were both the editor of the IJWP, the International Journal of World Peace, and Paragon House Publishers. You were the senior editor, or what was the title of your position with Paragon?
Well, I eventually became the president.
Very good.
Paragon House was originally founded to support the academic endeavors of ICUS and PWPA. But as those activities waned, then we took it, made it an independent. It also had an independent line, but it became a totally independent press at that time under my leadership.
And so under your leadership, you begin to start to work with the scholarly community in the same arena of effort, peace studies and the like, and social sciences. But now it's just a pure house of finding writers finding you, and you getting books out onto the.
Yeah, more like a traditional independent publishing company. Very
good. Earlier on, you mentioned in passing, as we were discussing the final issue of IJWP, funding. And I'm wondering, this must be characteristic of the field, perhaps, that a lot of journals would be facing similar types of challenges, and I guess they're responding in different ways, going to only online. And can you tell us about the field in general a little bit?
Well, most academic journals traditionally were founded by organizations. So like Professors World Peace Academy had the International Journal on World Peace, and the American Political Science Association would have its journal, the Psychological Association, the American Academy of Religion. Each of these organizations, in which scholars belong, would produce articles that pretty much explained the state of the art in the field. they were traditional institutional. They were, when we talk about institutions, the journals are themselves institutions that, or they reflect the value system of the institution as well as the evolution of those institutions. So as new discoveries are made in a field, they probably change the nature of the state of knowledge in that field. But
Yeah.
one thing that really has happened in the last 30 years is the acquisition of some of these traditional journals by financial interests, by investors, by large publishers that want to have a line of journals. And the problem with that is there has become a loss of the main goal and value system underpinning each journal, as the goal of the owners now becomes profit.
That's so interesting. It's
journals, in a sense, I don't think are as pure or represent, and they can be more politicized, or articles chosen based on profitability for some owner that's not even in the field of the journal.
Yes. Now
And
you
this
mentioned,
becomes a big problem.
yeah, you mentioned professional associations, and of course, universities themselves, and university departments themselves have renowned journals as well.
Yes.
The Harvard Law Review, or
right.
Foreign Affairs, or, yeah.
So those are departments of colleges, but also, like the University of Chicago had a critical journal that was transdisciplinary. It was for the school itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And not just for the department.
What you mentioned about the acquisition of journals, it kind of was a blow to the heart in a way, because of what every field suffers from that now. Everything has become a calculated monetization design that has severed the core idea of the very thing itself from serving any type of community.
And that leads to institutional dysfunction, whether it be a journal or whether it be a mom and pop store that wanted to give a family restaurant that gets acquired or put out of business by a chain of restaurants. And then what happens is you lose the personal and community aspect that institution originally served. And it becomes depersonalized, and decisions are made on Wall Street that might depend, look totally on how something can be done more profitably or efficiently, but they no longer care about the purpose.
Right. It's very painful. I think a big issue has been during the pandemic, the complete, what's the word I'm looking for, like decimation or wiping out of small businesses, and just a centralization of all production and distribution, and the entire market is
not only that, but yeah, when you have institutions that conglomerate, so that you have like CBS television, Simon and Schuster books. I forget if it's if it, AT&T or some large internet carrier, all combined under one group, and the ownership might be 50% Chinese.
Yeah.
And so, and the advertising for, say, CBS is their revenue comes 8% from pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
So if CBS is going to analyze something like the pandemic with independence, they can't really do that. And that yet shown that they don't do that, that they basically toe the line of the advertisers, because the advertiser, if they is somebody that contributed that much to the bottom line of CBS, could actually cause it to go out of business,
Right.
by pulling funding.
Yeah.
And holds it hostage to its mission.
It's overwhelming trying to even step onto the threshold of how corrections or solutions might be found in the face of this. I live very close to Manhattan Island. There's one township between the East River and my township. Mine is Sunnyside, and Long Island City sits between us. Now, Long Island City has become a home of real estate and high rises that's going to rival Manhattan Island itself. It's just springing forth to become an independent skyline between me and what was once the Manhattan skyline. But the thing about that eruption of high rises and buildings is that it's no longer a particular individual or a landlord buying property and building the buildings, so that you would have some character to either having office space or residential space there. You'd be dealing with a person who owned a building. Now there's these ultra wealthy conglomerates that are utterly unrelated to the fact that they're providing residential space. It's just generated by computers for every profit, to every penny, to every kind of derivative and things like that. And so even life itself, where you live, has fallen into the hands of some group of people who may never, they probably have from China. They may never visit New York, and yet they are coming to own it, rather than you see a building called the Macy's building or the Gimbel's building. This is just a time gone by.
And whether that's sustainable or not is a big question. Because when you undercut the community and local levels of society and try to make it just the individual and the global conglomerate, it doesn't really work. You can imagine how efficiently the federal government would plow your driveway.
Yeah.
And yet people often, in order to shove off responsibility, tend to ask higher levels of government to do things. Well, but they don't really understand that each level of governance, each level of size in a conglomerate has to have its own integrity if that whole conglomerate is to survive.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why some people talk about systemic failure of the United States today. I just recently saw an article questioning whether the United States was under systemic collapse. And the question is, many of the institutions are. And many of the institutions are not remaining true to their purpose, or they're not acting in a way in the entire system where they serve, like each cell in the human body serving its purpose. All these institutions have to organize in a way that each serve as organs of society rather than trying to run the whole society themselves. And yet many of them try to do that.
Yeah. I think the absence, you've long been a champion, and very early on, I recall reading you on the necessity of systematic mediating institutions from smallest to largest. And there's a big gap between the individual and the state. And there's not the mediating institutions, each with their own sovereignty, that are sufficient to protect the organism at its size. And when you have that big gap, you're perfectly vulnerable.
That's a big problem. And you could use the example of local police versus state police quite easily, because local police live in the town with the people they serve. They would not inappropriately draw a gun or view the people as enemies,
Yeah.
or criminals as terrorists, because they actually live in the town with them and know who they are and have face-to-face relations. And yet you see some of the recent trends after George Floyd of wanting to almost defund local police and ask for national police to come in. And then you have national police viewing citizens more like an army views of people in occupied territory, like the US troops might have viewed citizens of Afghanistan. US troops might view people in Sunnyside, the same way.
It's absolutely correct. And when I was thinking about the little example I came up with on the fly about this city emerging between me and Manhattan, the only thing people look to as some sort of protection against people invading where you live with no interest in where you live is equally far away. They want the politicians to legislate against it. That's the only recourse people have, is to politicians, and even that's a little too distant. There's not enough cohesive social, I don't know what the right word is, social institutions that correspond to between me and even my local government and representative.
That's true. You have to have the principle of subsidiarity kind of explains the idea of the principle of subsidiarity is the greatest responsibility to the lowest possible level of governance. So what you can do, you don't ask somebody else to do for you. Now, what your community can do, you don't ask the state to do it for you. So we used to have community schools where the parents set up the school, and they're definitely concerned about how their children grow up because they're their children. Yeah. And they want them to succeed. They want them to become independent. They want them to become good citizens. But if suddenly the state takes over the school because people don't want to fund it, but they'd rather defer their responsibility to some higher level that has money, then what happens is that state will eventually take that curriculum and turn it into indoctrination. It will, and the people who in charge of the curriculum have no personal relationship with the children, but maybe coming out of college with some theory of education they want to test on people. And therefore you end up not caring the way the local community would care. And you end up also, in the case of a school, you would not want really the children to become citizens that could throw out the bureaucrats that have the integrity to throw out the bureaucrats, because the bureaucrats have a vested interest in keeping their
Right.
position.
Right.
So in a sense, they don't want citizens, they just want voters that they can control.
Right. The way history and social sciences would be taught would be to support the system that they're trying to keep themselves in power.
Right, rather than, and that's the opposite of democracy, where the people are wanting the government to reflect the principles they believe in.
Yes. We know, or I think you and I both agree with the starting assumption or arguable assumption that it's somehow rooted in spiritual or religious origin points that have some guides for living a healthy life in the world, building healthy societies, being healthy individuals, and so forth. Each major cultural sphere is rooted in some core scripture. So people would imagine that the US, although it is a multi-religious society with the guaranteed rights of religious freedom of every believer and even non-believers, still it's often been understood that its earlier roots until recent times would be affirmed as Judeo-Christian, for example. In perhaps some Middle Eastern societies, they have their social, the ideals of a healthy and good society would be founded in, say, the Quran or Muslim culture, Hindu culture, and so on and so forth. So if this tendency or trend to the centralization or federalization of control over daily life is improper, or kind of heading to an ever more severe application of kind of being citizens being controlled by those without familiarity or interest in their circumstances. Would you imagine that there's any particular spiritual or religious or scriptural groundwork that could start to be a voice towards a correction of this direction, a correction of the ills that we've just identified?
Well, first of all, the way I view things, society is in three spheres. There are three social spheres: the sphere of governance, the sphere of culture, and the sphere of the economy. And each of these operate on different principles. So
say them again, please, one more time.
Governance, and the principle that underlies governance is force of law and force. There is the cultural sphere, and what underlies culture is love, relationships, knowledge, and human pursuit. What underlies the economic sphere is the market, ownership, and exchange of goods and services, and production.
Yes.
So these three spheres each have their own underlying principle, and we see rampant trespass of one sphere over the other. So religion is in the cultural sphere. You talked about the traditional religions. They're all in the cultural sphere. They've all given us knowledge, both internal and sometimes external knowledge, that enable a civilization to function. If you look at each of the main spheres of civilization, they all have sufficient values and rules and underpinning and consciousness that allows that civilization to exist.
Yes.
Whereas if you have a government call that religion as obsolete or outdated, and you just want to squash all those values with the governmental sphere or some large corporate behemoth, as we were talking about before, wanting to squash all those values with economic control, then with the suppression of that cultural sphere it will lead to complete social dysfunction and collapse, ultimately.
Collapse into tyranny, I guess.
Well, yes, you would first have tyranny and totalitarianism, and then that cannot stand probably more than 2 or 3 generations. Then you have collapse. So you might have the total disappearance of civilization. Today, what we see is more like a neo-feudalism developing, where with the collapse of the Roman Empire and the value system that underpinned it, you had feudal lords buying up all the land so that no individuals were middle class or controlled their own destiny anymore. People that had their own farms were now serfs on the land of some feudal lord. And this is what's happening in a way in the industrial and corporate sector today, where these mom and pop businesses are going out of business, and you're having feudal lords. You might say that the Davos conference clientele represents a meeting of modern feudal lords in many ways.
I understand. Yeah. Well, I had best laid plans.
We've sidetracked, but these are important.
These are important. No, I'm happy to go where we've gone, because it's a special expertise of yours, and it's an urgent voice and knowledge that needs to be out there. So I'm very pleased with where we've come. But in terms of any hope, given the directions and trends and problematic decisions or events which have happened, where would you find a voice of hope or of correction or an advocacy, or what an individual could do, what a listener could do, because I'm sure you don't see it as just a juggernaut that's inescapable, that it's a lost cause. What would we draw from to be responsive to trying to prevent these types of outcomes?
I think we have to address institutional failures, and we have to do that one at a time, from the local level all the way up to the federal and world level institutions. And we have a very poor understanding of institutions, the dynamics within them, and how to control them. As I mentioned before, we have the 10 commandments in Western civilization for individual behavior, which are important for individuals to live together in some society.
Yes.
But now we have all these institutions which have more power and more control. They also make things more efficient and possible to live in larger numbers in complex societies, but only if they're functioning properly. Mm-hmm. And so we have large populations in the world because of institutions. But we don't understand how they work. And you might remember Ronald Reagan's saying there's nothing more closer to eternal life than a bureaucratic institution. And that's because we don't know how to kill them. We don't know how to keep them on track. Almost every institution we see being hijacked by ideological people with ideological motives, or people with big egos that want to use the organization for their own personal purpose, and these things destroy institutions. And that's why in the last issue of the journal, one of the things we are pushing for or hoping for is that in the future there will be a better study of institutions. And the article by Don Trubshaw in the final issue of the International Journal on World Peace gets at some of the core components that have to be understood and should be the kind of things that are talked about in the media. When we look at failure of the government to do this or to do that, you have to look at whether the process itself is even functioning.
Got it. Got it. Well, I took in Don Trubshaw's piece. It starts with an introduction of what's it called? Institutional Values Transmission, IVT. It's one of the things which you say is needed if we're hoping to make some corrections. What I'd like to do, Gordon, is schedule a time to dedicate ourselves directly on what you're presenting here as a possible remedy for protecting ourselves from the type of collapse or surrender into totalitarian structures. And so if we can schedule a part 2 sometime in the near future, I would love that. Is that a possibility?
Certainly is. Certainly is. This is my area of interest right now, and what I feel is probably one of the most important issues facing the world
Of the day.
Yeah.
So although I couldn't hold us fast and okay with that, to the saints and giants that underlie a 38-year run for a great journal, we did honor them a touch, and let's have a kind of a reverential farewell to a magnificent career and work that you held from day one and kept going until this recent issue.
Yeah, I could have mentioned a couple of the other fellows and some of the other things that we learned along the way that I thought were very important and are all part of this discussion. So we can
we'll invite them back to in part 2.
Yes.
But this was educational for me, and I'm sure it will be for the listeners. And we're really grateful, Dr. Anderson, that you offer your time for us today.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, bye for now.
Goodbye.